Hi, welcome to our last week of CHLD 51A. I am sorry for the delay in launching the lecture video. I had some issues with my software. If you are having trouble getting into your small group, please click on the small group discussion and it will take you into the area where your small group is participating in discussions and sharing files. If you have questions, please let me know. I will help get you to where you need to be and help you complete this assignment. This week, we're going to talk about a couple of the identity categories we've not talked about before. One of them is the identity category of ability or disability. We'll talk about those terms, special needs, where those terms come from. But here's a couple of quotes to start us off. The disability is not the problem. The accessibility is the problem. We have no special needs children, just children with special needs. So these quotes get at two different aspects of what we're going to be talking about. One is that we want to think about children first. The labels, the categories that they belong to, their needs, all of those different pieces are a part of who the child is, but that's not all that the child is. So children first language. The second part is that every single child has something very important that they need to have met in a classroom, some need. Our job as teachers is to create the accessibility for them to have their needs met, whether or not they have a disability or are differently abled than somebody who's typically developing, whether that's mental, social, emotional, physical, any one of those areas. Our job is to create the accessibility, to create the ability for them to work in a typically developing classroom. So here's just a couple of statistics of the different types of disabilities. Specific learning disabilities, dyslexia, things like that. About 35% of the disabilities that we see are in those categories. Speech and language impairment, 21%. Other health impairment, 13%. Autism, 8%. Intellectual disability, 7%. Developmental delays, 6%. Emotional disturbance, which is anxiety, depression, PTSD, 5%. Multiple disabilities, 2%. Hearing impairment, 1%. And 1% orthopedic impairment. And these statistics may be surprising if I ask you to think about a child with a disability or a child with a special need. What do you think about? These statistics may not match what your thinking is based on what you've heard. I want to talk a little bit about language. There's a lot of different language that's been used over the years. Handicapped, disabled, differently abled, special needs, all of those different terms have been used. The one term we don't use anymore, unless we're talking about a parking spot, is handicap. There's a history there. It refers to begging with cap in hand, and it was believed a century ago that people who had different types of disabilities were no longer functional in society and couldn't contribute to society. It is dismissive and sidelines many people in our society who are actively contributing members of society, despite the fact that they may have one of the disabilities or special needs that we listed before. In the community, depending on who you're talking to, these terms change. Each individual has a term that they prefer to have used. For example, people who have hearing impairments most often do not prefer to be referred to as disabled. Instead, they consider themselves to be part of the deaf community, the majority of them. It's really important that you talk to people in all of these different identity categories we've been talking about the language they prefer to have used when referring to themselves. Each of us has a different word or set of words that we believe identify us. And so we definitely want to talk to individuals about that. Language can be used as an oppressive tool. Often as language shifts from one term to another, the reason that it shifts is because society has used it in a bullying sort of way towards a group of people. And that's the same with the special needs community or the disability community. So, blind children versus child with vision limitations. Again, we want to use the child first. The language changes if we say, this is Bobby who has some vision impairment. That changes our understanding of who Bobby is unless we say, this is a blind child whose name is Bobby. And then the first thing we're thinking about is the child being blind and not about all of who the child is. And there's so much more to who a child is than how they see the world and how they relate to the world. So don't forget or ignore that living with a disability makes life difficult. We want to make sure that we're understanding that we are comprehending that we have to make accommodations in our environments. But we definitely want to acknowledge the child first, and whatever that challenge is one part of who the child is. So I want you to try and read what this says. I know it says write what it says, but please try and read what I'm about to post. So some of you may have been able to make out what this was supposed to say. Here's what it says. Learning to live with a disability is a process that can take time and support from loved ones. This is what someone who has dyslexia, it approximates what they might see when they're reading a page. And in fact, there's a website here I'll show you. When someone has dyslexia, it appears that the language is shifting on the screen. And so the letters seem to be dancing. My son has dyslexia, and he describes it as the words dancing on the screen, the letters dancing around, and it makes it very difficult to read. Another similar disability is dyscalculia. And dyscalculia is the same thing, but with numbers, where numbers dance around on a piece of paper or on a screen, and it makes it hard to solve math problems. I want to shift from talking about children or families who have disabilities, and let me pause there actually before we shift. When we're working with children in the classroom who are differently abled, they don't have typical abilities that we would assume for all children if we were to take the idea of what society refers to as normal, which is a very narrow definition of humanity. When we're working with families and children, we need to remember to talk to them about what language they prefer. Think about what accommodations we can make. It really takes a team to meet the needs of any child. And in fact, every child has some type of need, whether or not it's a labeled need, one of the ones that meets the categories we talked about. And so building relationships with families is a critical aspect of our teaching in order to be able to do that. Through working with families, we can figure out what types of accommodations have worked for children in the past. We can figure out how we can make changes in our classroom to better meet children's needs. So that it's really critical that we're working with specialists, that we're working with families, that we're working with teams to meet children's needs and to address them. I want to think about family structures as we're thinking about working with families. These are some statistics for Santa Cruz County and Santa Clara County, and they're quite similar in the state of California as well. So female-headed households, you can see that they're slightly higher in Santa Cruz County than they are in Santa Clara County. They jump from 13% to 16% of the households. Male-headed households are about the same, about 4%. Married couples of opposite sex isn't listed for Santa Cruz County, but you can imply it by adding the numbers. Only about 3/4 of families in Santa Clara County are married couples of the opposite sex. Remember that some of those married couples of the opposite sex that are a man and a woman are remarried, and it's a second or third marriage for them. Unmarried couple of the opposite sex, 6.2%. Unmarried or married same-sex couple, 0.1% in Santa Clara County. and they say NA in Santa Cruz County. So this gives you a little bit of a breakdown of the different types of households that exist in those different counties. These statistics, as you can see, are a little problematic because they have these NA and LNEs there that don't give you accurate information. I'll show you the website where I got that information from at the end of this PowerPoint. This is another way to look at family, another set of statistics from 1970 to 2012. And so on the left here is 1970, and it goes all the way up to 2012. At the bottom are married couples with children, and then married couples without children, other family households, men living alone, women living alone, and other non-family households. And you can actually see those numbers shifting over 42 years. And so you can see that we've gone significantly down in the United States with the number of married couples with children. And we've stayed about the same with married couples without children. What has increased is other family households. Those are other households that are not married that have children. So they could be same-sex couples. These statistics in 2012 would not have included those same-sex couples that have since gotten married, since marriage rights were not given to everyone until fairly recently. This is another statistic that I find interesting and something that's changed significantly over the past 40, 50 years. It's children living in home with their families up until the age of 25, 26, all the way up to 34. And so you can see those changes over time. The numbers were lower. Children moved out when they were young adults, 18 to 24, at a much higher rate than they do now. And so what we have with socioeconomic status is an inability for young adults to move out into the world and create a place for themselves that they can afford. Rent is very expensive. Jobs are hard to come by. That's especially true in the Bay Area and other high cost of living areas. And so family dynamics change because of that. If we have a child in our child care center, they may have an adult sibling or multiple adult siblings living with them. They may have cousins or nieces or nephews living with them. And it may be a multi-family household or a multi-generational household. I want to look a little bit at international perspectives as well. The World Family Map reports that these key indicators of family structures in this section are a little bit different around the world than they are necessarily in the United States. Although two-parent families are becoming less common in many regions of the world, they still constitute a majority of families around the globe. Children are particularly likely to live in two-parent families in Asia and the Middle East. They're more likely to live with one or no parent in the Americas, Europe, Oceania, and Sub-Saharan Africa and other regions. One of the interesting statistics, if we look at family structure, is that there's 500,000 plus. The number's a little rough because they can't get accurate numbers for it, of children who are living with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and extended family members. Some of them are doing that officially through the CPS system or through the family services, but many of them are living with extended family and not with their birth parents, and it is an unofficial setup where a parent leaves a child with a grandparent and then leaves either for work or for other reasons. And so we have a large kinship network in the United States, and this is true in other countries internationally as well. Extended families, which include parents and kin from outside the nuclear family, are common in Asia, the Middle East, Central South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa, but not in other regions of the world. Typically, when children come to live with extended family without their birth parents in the United States, often that's happening because of some type of issue with the parent not being able to raise their child and asking somebody in the family to do it for them, or Child Protective Services stepping in to do that. But often in these regions that we're talking about, Asia, the Middle East, Central South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa, families are considered large networks. They're not just what we call a nuclear family, a mom, dad, and young children. There's an author, Stephanie Kuntz, who talks about the way we never were, and she talks about families over time and how they've evolved in the United States. She has a large series of statistics and facts that she cites in her book, but she covers the change in family over the 1900s. And in the early 1900s, most U.S. families had these extended kin networks where they had grandparents, aunts, uncles, and large groups of people living near each other and helping to raise the children together. The idea of a nuclear family came up after World War II. And the idea was that you didn't know who was communist, and therefore you should move away from family and create isolation within your nuclear family. And so it was a political move to really isolate people from other people within their families based on a fear of communism. And so the nuclear family really devised after World War II. Most of us have had large extended family networks helping raise children over centuries. Marriage rates are declining in many regions. Adults are most likely to be married in Asia and the Middle East and are least likely to be married in Central South America, with Africa, Europe, and North America and Oceania in between. Cohabitation, living together without marriage, is more prevalent among couples in Europe, North America, Oceania, and an especially high degree in Central South America. So marriage is not seen as a primary driving force as much as it was 50, 100 years ago. Now, 100, 200 years ago, when a man and a woman got married, because at that point those were the only legal marriages, that was seen as the woman becoming the property of the man in many, many areas of the world. And those laws have shifted mostly during the 1900s to being equal partnerships or legal partnerships. And so some of that change of living together versus getting married reflects some of those shifts of perspective. Communicating with children about divorce is really important. There are many teachers and many people I know who refer to families who have divorce in their history and part of their makeup as broken families. And in fact, divorce can be a very healthy transition for families, where families go from two parents living in the home, possibly not getting along well, not fitting well together, maybe even fighting, to being separated and creating two healthy households for a child if things go the way they should. So in order to help children adjust to a divorce in a healthy way, we need to explain that this is a separation. It's not the child's fault. Explain that it may take time to feel better. Keep the door open for communication. Encourage them to ask questions. And provide as much continuity as possible, and provide support for the child and for each of the parents. What's interesting is that families that have a good co-parenting relationship, even if they're not living in the same home, have tremendously wonderful outcomes for children. The divorce doesn't seem to have the same impact on them as families where the two households disagree about how to approach child-rearing issues. Children's development of self begins with their connection to their families. Supporting all types of families is really, really critical to promote every single child. When we refer to a family, for example, as a broken home, the child sees themselves as broken, and it diminishes their self-concept. We want to support all family types so we can support confident self-identity, positive interactions with diverse people, the ability to think critically about bias, and the ability to stand up for themselves and for others. We want children to understand that families come in all different forms. One of the stories I like to tell here is about my two youngest daughters. They came to me 12 years ago through the Child Protective Service system. My brother and his wife at the time were addicted to methamphetamines, and CPS came and removed the girls from the home. We were 3 states away, and after 3 foster homes and multiple reams of paperwork, my 2 young nieces came to live with me, and they were 3 and 4 at the time. I since adopted them 2 years after that in 2009, about 11 years ago, and I've been their mom ever since. And we've talked very openly as a family about their history, and I've answered their questions. They've had some indirect contact with their birth father, who's my brother, and we're in the process constantly of helping them understand who they are and how they came to be part of our family. And then my husband adopted them 5 years ago when we got married. In no way are they not our daughters? They're 100% our daughters for my husband and I, and we love them in the same way we love all of our children. We have 2 children, each of us by our first marriage, so 2 by birth, 2 step from each other's marriages, and then these 2 daughters that we both adopted. In 3rd grade, my youngest daughter came home from school with an assignment to ask me about her birth story. I went to the school and explained to them that what they had done for my daughter was to single her out as being different than the rest of the children because her mother didn't get her by birth. Her mother got her through adoption. And that furthermore, there were 3 other children in that same classroom of 20 children who had been adopted. And by asking them to go home and ask about their birth stories, they were isolating these children from really powerful stories about how they became part of our family. We have a story about how my daughters became part of our family, and I'll put that into the module. It's just a video of them telling the story when they were younger. And it is a legend for us. It's something I love telling the story of. We love talking about becoming a mommy at the airport, the best possible place to become a mommy. And the way I've worked over years to make that transition of becoming a mommy to my 2 daughters healthy, wonderful, gift to both my daughters and myself, that I got the gift of 2 beautiful daughters and they got the gift of me as a mommy. We worked over years to create that understanding, both of which are true. In one assignment in 3rd grade, my young daughter began to question the legend of our family, began to question whether or not she was normal. It was one assignment. Teachers have an incredible ability to support children and to support children in all the diverse ways that they come into our classrooms from their families. It's really important that we think about that and think about who our children are that are in our classrooms and how are we supporting them. How are we supporting them if they have a single parent? How are we supporting them if they have 2 dads? How are we supporting them if they have 2 dads in one home and a mom in another home? Every family is unique and every family is different. By getting to know who they are and supporting who they are, we're supporting the child. One of the other stories I tell at this point is about socioeconomic status and parenting structure. I was a divorced mom when I got my 2 daughters. So I had 2 sons and then I got 2 more children. So I was a single mother of 4 children. And you can imagine all the stereotypes that go with that. I confronted those stereotypes everywhere I went. As a college instructor, I wasn't socioeconomically disadvantaged. I was getting some support from the state to take care of my daughters. But my youngest daughter liked to poke holes in her clothes. So I could send her to school in brand new clothes. And by the time I picked her up, there were holes all over her pants and her shirts. And she would find paper clips and poke a hole in and make it bigger. And it was part of her traumatic recovery that she obsessed over holes. And it was part of what she did as a coping strategy. Her teacher at the time had a 5th grade child in the after school program who asked her, why does this child always have holes in her clothes? And the after school teacher looked at this 5th grade child and said, well, some people can't afford clothes, and gave basically a comment that my family was struggling financially. We weren't. That 5th grade child was the daughter of a really good friend of mine. And 2 days later at play practice, she came up to me in the lobby and said, are you okay? Do you need a Christmas tree? Can we help you buy presents for the children? Are you doing okay? I said, where is this coming from? We're fine. And then she told me the story. And so that teacher was treating my daughter as if she was disadvantaged economically when she wasn't, and treating me as if I was disadvantaged as a mom, and I wasn't. We immediately pulled them out of that school. The social worker, my sister, and my mom and I, all of whom were engaged in both of my daughters' child rearing at the time. My mom and sister were tremendous supports. So both of these stories from my own family experience are hopefully stories that encourage you to really think about supporting all types of families. You don't know what disadvantages or advantages a family has until you ask them. Don't assume by the structure. Make sure you're supporting all family structures in your classroom so children from all families can see normal family interaction in a single parent family. They can see normal family interaction in all different family structures. Changing family and changing society, gender fluid, gay, or lesbian families, the children can be born into a heterosexual relationship through donor insemination, surrogates, adoption. They're very similar to what we call heteronormative families. So families that have two moms or two dads are very similar to a family that has a mom and a dad. The family composition varies. Sometimes it's a single parent, sometimes it's not, just like with heterosexual families. There's no difference in the child adjustment and mental health when compared to children of heterosexual families if social constructs and ideals are supportive. That means that if children are raised in a community where there's a lot of support for their family structure, there's no differences in outcomes. Most children grow up to be heterosexual, whether they're raised by two dads, two moms, or a mom and a dad, or single mom, single dad, grandparent. Sexuality is not determined by the family structure a child is raised in. One of the statistics, and I'm going to go backwards and make you dizzy for a minute here, but one of the statistics here is the female-headed household in Santa Cruz County is 16.6%, and the female-headed household in Santa Clara County is 13%. Part of the reason that's true is there is a very large support network in Santa Cruz County for lesbian moms. They have done a lesbian moms conference over many years that supported same-sex families back in the 90s. And so there's a community of support there, and the schools represent that support as well. And so healthy outcomes are seen when that level of support in a community is there for a family or a particular type of family. The silence, remember, silence is deadly. Silence and invisibility about LGBTQIA plus people in early childhood settings can lay the foundation for the harassment that begins in elementary school and leads to bullying, violence, and teen suicide. Some of the most common insults currently used by children on the playground, beginning in elementary school, are gay or faggot. These are often words that children do not even understand, and yet they are allowed to use them in derogatory ways without adult intervention. Children learn that these words are hurtful, that if somebody uses them towards you, there's something bad about it, before they even understand what the words mean. This is a type of bullying that is still largely allowed on the playground in elementary schools. Because of that type of bullying and because of the negative connotations associated with it, 33% of all teen suicides are LGBTQIA plus youth. That's a large number, a third. It's a much larger number than the percentage of children who identify as non-heterosexual and non-cisgender. 50% of lesbian and gay youth are rejected by their own families when their sexual orientation is disclosed. The numbers are similar for transgender or gender fluid children. Many of these children end up out on the streets and homeless. That's half. That's a huge number of children to be rejected for an identity category. 80% of youth who are harassed as gay actually identify as heterosexual, and there's stereotypes that children are responding to. They're 5 times more likely to commit suicide than other youth. In fact, transgender youth commit suicide at a 40% higher rate than other youth in middle school, early high school age groups. 97% of high school students hear anti-gay epithets on a daily basis. All of this negativity about LGBTQIA plus identity categories leads to children feeling confused about themselves and possibly about their parents, if their parents are LGBTQIA families. And so we have to really think about how are we as teachers supporting these children, supporting families, and helping to end some of the bullying that's happening on the playground. So something to consider, there's at least one child in almost every single early childhood classroom who in later years will recognize their identity as LGBTQIA. So let's break down the letters. L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B is for bisexual. There's actually a lot of sexual categories that are not considered an LGB. Some people are now considering themselves to be what they call pansexual, which means they're attracted to the individual and it doesn't matter what their gender is or gender identity is. And so those three refer to who are we attracted to romantically, physically. T is transgender. For children who are transgender and adults who are transgender, there is a true identity of feeling strongly that they are the opposite gender than the gender they were assigned at birth. For individuals in those categories, that disorientation they feel starts at a very young age. I've actually known at least 3 different children in my preschool classrooms who've shown signs they may be transgender. And there's a different type of conversation they're having. There's questions they're asking. There's things that just are not typical that you would see in gender development. So, for example, one little boy asked his mother, "When will my penis drop off like the other girls? Why do I have a penis and the other girls don't have a penis?" Now, that child went back and forth over a number of years, and actually the teacher worked with the family to create a name tag where the child could flip the name tag depending on which pronouns the child wanted to use. And by 4th grade, that child went by Laura, Nora, she, and her, and very strongly identified as a girl. Now, queer or gender fluid, the terms are changing often faster than I can keep up with them in my PowerPoints. But queer gender fluid refers to people who don't really identify with one category or another. Often stereotypes are getting in the way of us being able to identify with one category or another. Intersex and then asexual are the I and the A, and then plus is everything we haven't identified yet. Basically, that trying to define humans is much more complex than 2 categories, is what this is telling us. Silence, fear, negativity, or avoidance about LGBTQIA plus people in educational settings gives them the message that they are neither welcome nor safe in the world. Every child should feel welcome and safe in the world. So remember, silence has a powerful voice, especially when it excludes the people most important to children. When we are not talking about a child's 2 moms or a child's 2 dads, we are practicing silence about who their family is. And that is very harmful. When it excludes the people who keep children safe and tuck them into bed at night and feed them and love them, their family, that silence leaves the child feeling like they have to choose between what society is telling them and what their family is telling them. It may leave them feeling like there's something wrong with their family. It may leave them feeling hurt and angry that society doesn't recognize who their family really is. It is very harmful. Silence is also very harmful for children who don't come from these households. For example, children who come from heterosexual families who live in communities where many of the families look like their families, that silence can lead them to believe that there's something wrong with people who don't look like what they're used to seeing. And that can lead to some of the bullying, some of the behavior that we talked about in the previous slides. So in order to really support children from all different backgrounds, we need to make sure that there is representation of those families in our classrooms in different ways. Books, classroom materials, all the things we've been talking about. We're going to shift a little bit and talk about spirituality. So I'd like you to pause the video here. And if you need to get a drink of water and take a break, please do, and then come back. When you pause the video, take 5 to 10 minutes and a piece of paper and a pencil and think about what you believe about life, death, and the meaning of life. You're not going to turn this in. This is just for you. And it is absolutely connected to religion and spirituality. Think about what you believe. Why do you believe what you believe? How did you first hear or think about that belief? Was it a family, a friend? Were you searching for something and went looking for a belief or a faith to hold on to? Write a note to yourself. You don't have to share any of this, but I want you to reflect on that. And when you're done, please come back. the PowerPoint and push play again. Welcome back. Think of a time when you first encountered someone whose religious or spiritual belief was different than your own. What was that like for you? What was it like for them? What surprised you in the encounter? What were your thoughts about what you felt like should happen in a conversation? What feelings came up for you? What was your reaction of those around you to this different belief? What about how you believe? Did this encounter alter your beliefs in some way? Did you learn something from this other person that had you questioning your own beliefs and finding new ideas about what you believe? Is what you believe widely accepted in the current culture that you're living in? And that's largely based on community, and that's largely based on ethnicity, areas of the world. What we believe, our spiritual practices, are often deeply connected to our holidays. One of the things that happens with anti-bias education is that we avoid talking about holidays because we're worried that we're going to offend parents. There's an old saying in the United States that if you want to have a polite conversation, don't talk about religion, money, or politics. Religion can be a topic that's very difficult to talk about. And I want to think about why. Why is that? Why is it uncomfortable for some? Why do we struggle with this conversation? I think one of the reasons is often in religions, what's taught is that you want to get everybody to believe the same thing that you believe, that they may either be saved or go to a good place, but only if they believe the same thing that your group believes. This is common in many, many different religions. That leaves two people believing strongly what they each believe, wanting to convince the other person that their belief is true. If education recognizes the intrinsic value of the child's personality and it provides an environment suited to spiritual growth, we have the revelation of an entirely new child whose astonishing characteristics can eventually contribute to the betterment of the world. That's Maria Montessori. I want to think about what's common in all these different faiths, beliefs, religions. So in order to do that, hang with me for a few minutes and let's take a sidestep here. In Great Basin bristlecone pines, they are remarkable for their tremendous age and their ability to survive adverse growing conditions. The oldest living tree on Earth is 4,600 years old. When I first heard this, I had this feeling of awe. This feeling of how incredible is it that a tree could have lived for 4,600 years. So think about a time when you were awestruck. It might have been that you saw something beautiful or remarkable. It might be connected to a life-changing event, a birth of a child. It might have been connected to music or hearing something which evoked a tremendous feeling inside of you. And it might have reminded you of the wonder of life. Maybe it took your breath away. For me, it was hiking the Nepali coast in Kauai. I had twisted my ankle, I was in pain, but I continued on because I was 25 and I was going to get to the top of that mountain, that cliff. And about halfway up the trail, I realized I'd been walking forward and not actually looking at where I was. And I stopped and I looked out off of this cliff into the ocean. And it was the bluest blue, aquamarine colors in the water. The land around me was unspeakably gorgeous. And I was alone. There was no one else on the trail. And I was awestruck. It was something miraculously beautiful. So what was it for you? Think about that. Spiritual development in young children doesn't have to take the form of a specific religion to support that connection with something that's awestruck, that moment of awe. Foundational experiences for young children can include unity and connectedness to others, that we don't live in a world alone, that we can have great joy in our lives. We can question why. What are the mysteries of the universe that nobody has solved yet? We can wonder, wow, at something really incredibly beautiful. We can talk about growing, dying, life, and death. Every religion, every spiritual belief, even if it is the basic belief that we are born and given one life, and when we die, we become part of the earth and the dirt, or whether we believe in one of the traditional religions that's out there, all of them have these elements. All of them talk about connectedness to others, joy, mystery, questioning, awe, wonder, growing and dying, life and death. We can have conversations with children in these categories without defining them, without attaching them to specific religions, which leaves us open to supporting multiple families and supporting questioning and finding places where children belong. This is a wonderful quote by Dewitt Jones. Yesterday, deep in a storage shed, I found a giant bubble wand that I hadn't used in years. I spent the afternoon in childlike delight. Sometimes life gets much clearer if you allow yourself a little time to just play. Awe can be found in moments of play. In children, you'll see that moment of awe in children's eyes when they discover something incredible, a spider web in the morning when they first go out into the play yard. That's a moment to recognize the moment of awe and join them in looking at this incredible thing. What do you see? How long do you think it took the spider to spin that web? There's a moment where we can get connected with that sense of awe. Early childhood programs address this aspect of development in 4 ways. Either, or most programs, teach children what's right from what's wrong. It begins with my needs versus your needs. At what point do my needs take a second step to your needs? How do we negotiate if our needs are different? So right and wrong is one of the ways we do that in childcare programs. We talk about life and death because it comes up. A classroom pet may die. An insect we brought inside and didn't take back out may die. Family members may die. And so matters of life and death get talked about often in classrooms. Conflict resolution, problem solving, peace education is part of early childhood programs and part of a lot of religions. How do we solve conflicts? Harmony, caring for the earth, respecting differences, love of nature, deep appreciation, wonder, growing and dying. All of these aspects are addressed in an early childhood classroom. We want to nurture the spirit of children, fostering dispositions of joy and wonder, emotional sensitivity and caring, attentiveness to others, the mysteries of life and the world around them, of deep appreciation. All of these can happen without it being attached to a specific religion. What would it take to include these values in the early childhood setting, in every early childhood setting? How could we do this if our families come from a variety of different religious or spiritual beliefs? What would we need to do? What gets in the way of that? How might the world be better if we fostered these dispositions for all children, irregardless of what name they put on their religion or their belief? What if we fostered all of these values and goals for all children? Deep appreciation and giving thanks. You're going to have a discussion this week, so I hope you'll talk about some of these things in the discussion. Why is being appreciative or thankful an important human capacity? What is that feeling of thanks? When we tell a child to say thank you, are we recognizing that that's an emotion? When I say thank you, I'm feeling gratitude. I'm feeling appreciation for whatever it is that person's done. That feeling, that emotion connected to the words is really important. Otherwise, what happens is we have human beings that say, thank you, thank you, thank you, without any connection to the emotion of it. The same thing happens with please and sorry. If we're really going to understand these deeper emotions, we have to make sure we're connecting the actual emotional feeling with the words. What are some specific practical ways we can model a deep appreciation for things, life, opportunities, and people so that children can fully understand the meaning of thankfulness? Think about ways you might do that in the classroom. And remember, this is about showing thankfulness, not telling, not just parroting words. I want you to pause the video here and make a list of all the important days in a year for you, both religious and personal, all of them. For example, in my family, we celebrate adoption days in November usually. We also remember our family and those who have served in the military on Memorial Day. I'd list both of those. I would also list the day my husband asked me to marry him, which we call Mary, Mary, Mary Day. It was Christmas Eve, and he took me to the beach. So we celebrate Mary, Mary, Mary Day every year. So what are your important days? Go ahead and pause the video and list those out. And when you're ready, come back. When you list those days, think about where they fit in the year. In classrooms, we typically observe the same days every month in United States classrooms. In January, it's pretty predictable, President's Day, New Year's. February is President's Day, actually. January is Martin Luther King Day. February is Black History Month. For whatever reason, the United States thinks that only needs to be talked about 1 month out of every year, which I disagree with. Women's history, Black history, Asian history, all of our history as human beings should be told year round. But February is the month that typically gets talked about in schools. Valentine's Day in February, March, St. Patrick's Day. We have these very typical holidays, and if I asked you to list those, you could probably list the typical American holidays in all 12 of those months. What happens for children with those typical holidays, U.S. holidays, is that they are seeing them everywhere. They're seeing them in the store, they're seeing them on TV, they're inundated with these days, and it leaves them with the impression that these are the normal days for everyone, which is not true. If you go around the world, these days have different meanings or don't exist at all in some countries, and in some communities here in the Silicon Valley as well. So think about, did your family celebrate holidays when you were a child? And which ones of those days that you listed did your family celebrate? And which ones were your favorites? How important were those days in your family? Was there preparation involved? Was your whole family involved, extended family? As a child, did you ever feel excluded because of what your family did or did not celebrate? Now as an adult, do you ever feel excluded because of what you believe? Do you know people around you who feel excluded because of what they believe? And this isn't an exclusion of one person who says, this is what I think about you. This is an exclusion within larger institutions, within schools, within communities. One example is when I was a child, I had a friend who was Jewish in my elementary school. And she was the only child who celebrated and observed Hanukkah in November, December, when we were in school. And in the 70s, it was one of those things we talked about because we were trying to celebrate and think about diversity in the 70s in different ways in schools. But I remember having long conversations with her about how sad she would get at Christmas because she felt like she was the only person not in on this big secret that was Christmas. And it changed the way her family observed Hanukkah. And I remember a lot of those conversations when we were children. And so I think about her and how she felt really excluded because she had a different belief than what the other people in school had, or than teachers that they talked about. Holidays carry a very personal meaning for children and families. They can remind us of who we are and what is important in life. They involve relationships with families and friends. They bring feelings of warmth, excitement, and anticipation. They remind us of the rhythmic passing of the seasons of time. They connect us to our cultural roots. They focus on our spirituality and our values, and they carry deep social meaning. One of the books that I have in the children's books reading for this week is One Candle, and it is one of my absolute favorite books. It is a story about a family observing Hanukkah and the deep social meaning and the carrying forward of history that family has with their particular ritual. Today, holidays are strongly influenced by the media. Not everyone enjoys holidays. Many people I know as adults dread going home for the holidays, or if they go home for the holidays, come back talking about fights or disagreements or things that are happening. Not every family celebrates holidays, and they definitely don't all celebrate the same way. We each have our own idea of how to do something. Holidays can hold different meanings for different people. For people who've recently lost somebody in their family, holidays can be a very sad time. Depression and suicide rates increase significantly in November and December of every year in the United States. Not every family celebrates holidays in the same way. In fact, most families are unique and different in the way they do things. And if you ask them, there's something special or unique about what they do, even if you celebrate the same day. Some holidays exclude some families. One of the things to think about holidays that exclude families is Mother's Day and Father's Day. When I was a single mom, we didn't have a father for Father's Day for a long time, not until I met my husband. When my children were told in school to make a present for their father, it was very confusing for them. They felt like they were missing something everyone had that they didn't. When in fact, they had a rich community of people, uncles and friends, both men and women, who supported and loved them. And so the day left them feeling left out when it could have helped them feel included. The way we present holidays can trivialize a group of people. When we talk about Thanksgiving, for example, we are trivializing what actually happened. Thanksgiving talks about this mythical time. Here's my cat Harry saying hello during the lecture. We talk about this mythical time when people who were white pilgrims came to the United States shores and had this meal with people who were Native American. And we often give the idea that this was some jovial, happy event and that they all became friends. And that's how we sell this to children or talk to children about it. In reality, what happened is the people who were white in power sent blankets with smallpox to tribes to get them sick so they could kill them off. They took their land. Wars were fought for years. And so it misrepresents a very painful part of our history as a country. So our anti-bias goals for holidays, let's think about those. Remember that invisibility erases identity and experiences. Visibility affirms reality. When children see themselves and their families reflected in their early childhood setting, they feel affirmed and that they belong. So our holiday policy and practice should reflect our anti-bias goals. One, that each child will have self-awareness and confidence, family pride, positive social identities. And two, that each child will express comfort and joy with human diversity. So we want both of those goals for all of the children in our classrooms. So one thing to think about, and I want you to just in your own head play a mind game with yourself. Your director has come to you and told you that the family she met in a pre-enrollment interview today had some concerns about classroom practices. This family does not want to celebrate holidays and does not want their child to be involved in classroom activities surrounding holidays, something which is part of your normal classroom practice. The family hopes the teacher can find a way to honor their beliefs while not excluding their child, and the director wants you to share your ideas with the family prior to the enrollment of the child. So think about, how would you approach this as a teacher? How would you create a classroom that still had gatherings, this sense of belonging, when you have a child in the classroom who can't participate in any celebrations because of the religious beliefs of that family? So it's a good mind experiment to think about, how would you approach that? In many classrooms, what we see is holidays as a way of introducing other cultures, and it simplifies and trivializes cultures when what we say is, okay, it's Chinese New Year, here's the dragon, all right, we're done with China. It makes a group of people into a holiday in a costume, instead of truly considering the depth and complexity of who people are. The classroom uses the holiday to visit that culture, when in fact many of the children, especially in our classrooms in Santa Clara County, actually come from those cultures that we're visiting. Images of people who celebrate the holiday are often absent from the classroom until the next year, which means children are not feeling represented except on holidays. This is around Halloween costumes, but I think it's very important to think about. Focusing on holidays to teach about different cultures can leave people feeling like they're just a costume. We're a culture, not a costume. So you see here 3 different examples of people holding up posters of somebody with a stereotypical image of somebody from their culture. And it doesn't represent the complexity of the 3 real human beings on the posters. This leads to trivializing a cultural group. It promotes misinformation, and it encourages the misuse of symbols which are meant only for members of that cultural group. This can happen when we put up multicultural images of children around a gymnasium for a concert. And those images are all these types of costumes that you see here in the poster, and not the real people and individuals. Here's another set of those posters. I think this is a really interesting one to look at. I'm honoring you, dude. No, you're not. This is kind of offensive. Then this is how the world sees you. It's just not funny. And I think that this is something that's so critical for us to think about as teachers. When we bring holidays in costumes in, or bring food from your home country, that doesn't have as much meaning for a child as asking a child to bring their favorite food. Maybe they migrated from Mexico when the child was 5, but their favorite food is spaghetti. That's interesting. Let the child bring their favorite food. And so really focusing on culture with just food and costumes leads to more injury than help. So here's a few more. Benefits of actually having holidays as part of the curriculum: it demonstrates that different beliefs are good, it's respect for diversity, and it validates a child's family and experience. It provides another way for children, teachers, and families to deepen their relationships, and it's fun. If we're going to bring holidays into the classroom, instead of bringing it in trivial ways with multicultural days and costumes, think about how you can do it having the families come in and talk about what's important to them about those days. Having my friend Eric used to come in for Hanukkah, and he would bring in dreidels and play dreidel with the children at the table and talk about how they played dreidel in his family for Hanukkah. Having families come in for Holi and doing celebrations with the children, or little activities with the children to talk about the celebrations they do at home. There's ways in which, if a family doesn't want to have their child engaged in celebrations, they could have them engaged in an activity that talks about something another family does. You have to talk to families to figure out whether that works for them. But having the family bring it in and talk about how we as a family do this makes it much more personal to children. Now, that should be well rounded with asking families to come sing with the children, read books with the children, bring aspects of their home in, pictures, taking it out of the costume into the real depth of who families are. Other benefits of the holiday curriculum is it breaks up routine. It can celebrate positive things in our world and our life. It instills values in children. Often these days that are important to us have values. Memorial Day is a really important day with a lot of values attached to it. There were people who protected us and took care of us. And we remember them, and we remember that they fought for us. The coming together of holidays, especially during November, December, January, in the darkest time of the year, every culture has some day or some series of days that talks about light, how we can light candles and we can turn on lights and we can put lights on trees to light up the darkness and come together in community. That's a really important value for children, that we can come together in community and take care of each other. It's an opportunity for children to feel special when they get to bring their family in and talk about their important day and the important things they're doing. It allows for thoughtful dialogue between families and staff. Again, keep this focused on the families, not on the commercial representation of the days. What's important to the families about those days, and try and get to the heart of that rather than the stereotype and the superficial image of it. Holidays are a part of our culture. If families celebrate holidays, what they celebrate and how they celebrate it, when and with whom, is all influenced by that family's beliefs and values. Every family is unique and different, just like every human being is unique and different. If families do not celebrate the holidays that are a part of our cultural tradition, how does that impact their experience? Every single child in the United States knows about Santa Claus. In October, November, Santa Claus is very, very well known, whether or not a family actually celebrates Christmas. That shows how pervasive our culture is at making sure that that image of Christmas is what children see, whether or not that's how the family celebrates that day or thinks about that day. Think about the experience for a child who that is not the important day for them in their culture. And devise goals for celebrating holidays in the early childhood setting. Remember, we want to connect children, families, and staff. We want to learn about important events in the lives of all children and families in the program. And we want to support and validate the experiences of children and families and staff. We want to reinforce connection to cultural roots. We want to celebrate similarities and differences in children's lives. There are holidays and days of the year that we have some myths about that are really important to think about when we're thinking about holidays. One of them is Dia de los Muertos. Dia de los Muertos is a day set aside for remembering those who have died and making sure that they know they're remembered, because in telling stories about this loved one, telling stories about their life, some part of them stays alive. It's a very simplistic way of talking about Dia de los Muertos. But it's not about skulls, and it's not about skull candy, which is some of the stereotypes that are out there about that day. We want to stretch children's awareness and empathy. We want to teach children critical thinking about bias. We want to teach activism. We want to teach children accurate information about specific holidays. And holidays help us mark time. One of the other days that gets grossly misconstrued in the United States is Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo is often in the United States celebrated as a Mexican Independence Day. In fact, in Mexico, Cinco de Mayo is only celebrated by one little tiny region of Mexico. And the story is that during the Civil War, when the South and the North were fighting in the United States, the French came to land in this one little space in Mexico. And the population of that area fought them back and didn't let them land. Because of that, the French troops didn't come to reinforce the South in the United States, and the North won the war. So if we're happy that the North won the war, we owe a debt to that tiny little area of Mexico. What happened, though, is that here in the United States, it became a Mexican Independence Day, which is not what that day represents. So there's a lot of misinformation about days that are out there. And there's probably some misinformation about days that your family finds very important as well. We want to have fun. Having fun with children is really an important part of a classroom, finding that joy. We want to learn about unfamiliar holidays. This is important for a lot of different reasons. It's important to make a connection with the holiday and the people or experience that are familiar to the children, but also those that are not familiar, so they can find that joy and diversity we talk about. Consider the surrounding community that you have. Who are the families represented in your community? Do they celebrate Kwanzaa? Is that a day that's important to them? Read a book, invite a friend, share your story. All of those are ways to talk about unfamiliar holidays, and the most meaningful is to have families share their own experiences. Addressing stereotypes in holiday celebrations is critical. Many of our national holidays contain stereotypical images of our present history from only one perspective. So Thanksgiving is definitely a great example of that, where it's giving us one perspective of history. And that perspective is being told by the dominant culture, not by the people who had thousands upon thousands of their ancestors die at the colonization of the United States. So stereotypical images can be very, very hurtful. Stereotypes are hurtful because they demean individuals and groups, and they perpetuate prejudices and teach misinformation. So can you think about some national holidays which might perpetuate stereotypes or perpetuate misinformation? And talk about those in discussion this week. So some of the stereotypes that come up, consider the developmental levels of your children. Avoid images in the classroom. Help children gain accurate information about groups and cultures, religions. Wiccanism is an actual religion and one that many people follow. It is what some people would call witch or pagan. But what it really is a connection to the earth and a connection to the seasons and the changes in the earth over time. And so some of these stereotypical images, like with the hat and the cape and the broom, are very offensive if people do hold Wiccanism as their religion. And again, Cinco de Mayo, sombreros, and maracas are not typical anywhere but in a tourist area of Mexico or in United States celebrations of Cinco de Mayo. So they're very stereotypical and can be very hurtful. We want to encourage children to think critically about these stereotypical images and how they might make other people feel. We want to make cultural respect and fairness an ongoing part of our classroom practice. We want to talk with families, share accurate information, and emphasize that you are not planning to eliminate the holiday, but are reframing it. That we understand these days are super important to our families, but we also want to think about how to reframe some of those days so that they're meaningful for children and accurate. What we know as anti-bias educators is that what families believe and how they practice what their belief is a part of their family identity. Providing information as it relates to each child is really key and critical. And gaining comfort in addressing children's questions comes with self-reflection and practice. Those reading reflections we've been doing have been an opportunity for you to think about what you believe and how it relates to what we've been reading. So finals, we're going to be headed into finals week next week. Your small group should be working on their project. There will be a self-reflective final next week. It'll be a paper that opens on Monday and asks you to think about 4 to 5 key things you've learned over the course of this class, and then connect that to the reading and the information in the module. So if you want to get an early start thinking about how to connect 4 or 5 things from the class, they should be significant moments of learning for you. And then you're going to want to cite the book or cite materials in the module. I wanted to give you a head start on that. I will see you online. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.